started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first session of a new housing speaker series hosted by the Mountain Housing Council called Lunch and Learn. This series is an opportunity to dive deeper into a variety of housing topics, from today's session on key housing terms to specific information on upcoming housing projects. I'm going to share my screen. Today's meeting format will be a 30-minute presentation followed by a live Q&A for approximately 20 to 25 minutes. We ask that you please post any questions you have in the chat box or save them until the end. Our presenters will answer all questions during the Q&A portion of this meeting. This meeting will be recorded and shared later on Mountain Housing Council's website. If you do wish to participate without having your image recorded, you may turn your video off. Otherwise, we encourage you to keep your video on and remind you to mute your microphone. The Mountain Housing Council is a project of the Tahoe Truckee Foundation. Many of you know us for our grant making and scholarship work and our mission-based initiative work that includes Forest Futures and family strengthening through the Community Collaborative. Additionally, we have spearheaded emergency response dollars to the community, and for the first time, our impact investment with the Martis Fund into the Truckee Artist Lofts. This project is nearly complete, which we're really excited about. The Mountain Housing Council brings together 28 diverse stakeholders, businesses, local governments, community groups, special districts, and housing advocates to take on the unique and pressing challenges of achievable local housing in our North Lake Tahoe region. We know there is a need for housing at every income level, from homeless to middle income salary earners. We elevate and educate regional housing needs in the community through outreach, posting resources on our website, and by tracking data. Our housing needs survey just closed last week. You may have seen it through all the various MHC partners who shared it. And the data will be made available in the near future. We are proud of the MHC Partnership. We have 28 nonprofit partners, businesses, and coalitions. If you are a Mountain Housing Council partner, we ask that you just raise your hand using the reaction on the Zoom. Together, we're accelerating solutions to our unique housing needs. And thank you so much, MHC partners, for joining us. You can lower your hand. And we're going to get started with today's topic, why you're here. Today's topic, community housing basics, understanding key terms, is critical to understanding our community's housing types, programs, and policies. Our guest presenters, Seana Doherty, Housing Program Manager of the Town of Truckee, Emily Setzer, Senior Management Analyst of Placer County, and Anne-Marie Novotny, Housing Specialist of Placer County, will define some of the key terms that we use. These terms are the building blocks of community housing and are often misunderstood or confused. We hope today to bring more clarity and a common language for us to use. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Seana Doherty, Housing Manager for the Town of Truckee, and she is going to help us understand Area Median Income, or AMI.
Thanks, Christina, and welcome everybody, and thanks. Just before we get started, I think there'll be a lot of information that in looking at the participant list is but also it's always a good reminder for all of us, and then welcome to those where this is all new information. So area median income is a critical sort of baseline piece of information that's used in all housing program development. So it's developed by Housing and Urban Development, which is a federal organization who every year sets area median income based on the midpoint of income distribution per a geographic region. So then they base program and resource allocation and the types of housing that they do based on sort of this baseline information. So an area median income just simply means that 50% of a geographic region's income are this is the midpoint. So 50% are below this and 50% are above this. If you go to the next slide, to demonstrate this, you start to look at how these numbers are used. And so for Placer County, Nevada County, the feds, Housing and Urban Development sets the limits. They get pushed down to each county, each state, and then to the county. And then they come up with their median income based on the midpoint. And then they take a percentage of that to set sort of who they want to serve. So it is confusing, but in general, the orange range means when you see the 80% number, that means it's 80% of the median income. So it's just good to understand sort of what is the baseline number that they're using, and then we design programs around that median income number. So the number that you'll see a lot when we're talking about the projects is called area median income, AMI. You'll see that in the top of the slide. AMI is the term that we use to talk about who that project is aiming to serve. So what is the income of that particular family, and who is that project trying to serve? So we'll go into the next one. So, you know, a lot of these numbers, like I said, are set by the federal Housing and Urban Development, and they come to the state, and it's something for all of us who work in housing to constantly build programs around, because state grants and funding for affordable housing is set based on sort of who is the target income they're trying to serve. And they really, we all really rely on these numbers to set sort of criteria for getting into housing. But I also think it's very important to think about who are the people behind these numbers. You know, we think about, I work every day in thinking about AMI levels and number of people in the household, and designing programs and working on projects based on AMI for Nevada County, because the town of Truckee is in Nevada County. But it's, you know, for the general public, trying to figure out as we design programs, who are we not serving? And then who are we serving that are in the programs that exist? So I know this is a lot of information, but if you kind of hone in on the 80% number, and I'll talk about this later, but that 80% number, so for Nevada County, that means that someone makes an income of the area median income for 80% in Nevada County is about $50,300. And you can see how it's a little different in Placer County, because when they pull the data for that income distribution, the data is different in Placer County. So if you look at a teacher, they make $53,000. This is just probably an entry-level teacher, and they wouldn't qualify for housing that is the 80% and below. So it's just kind of you see how these numbers really factor into the types of programs and the type of products in housing that we have, and who in fact it actually ends up serving. So it just pushes us to make sure that we're creating programs that serve a range, and how we all operate is by using this framework of these numbers. So next slide. So this is a housing bridge that brings all of this information together. So I'll just walk you through it, because it's, you know, that I just sort of talked about AMI, which is a lot of information and really hard to understand, to be quite honest. But really what it translates into when we're doing program planning is, you know, where are the needs and what are our responses to those needs, and where are we getting the funding to serve that need? So Mountain Housing Council did a needs assessment in 2016 and discovered that, in fact, there's needs across our income spectrums. And so how do we create responses and programs that really take into account the wide range of needs? So if you look at this, it goes now that we've sort of talked about that AMI and you have a tiny bit of familiarity with what that means, is can understand that 80% AMI over here in the orange equates to, from the federal and the state level, that really equates to sort of lower income wage earners, and where there's lots of state funding for those types of programs and for those types of projects. And when you think about, for those of you who are in Truckee, the kind of programs that we have, the type of housing downtown, the Truckee Artist Lofts, Coldstream Commons, Frischman, all of the very traditional affordable housing apartments fall into the 80% AMI and below. And that generally creates the products, because of the funding from the state. It drives the type of product you get, which is income restricted affordable housing apartments. Then when you get into the teal zone, which is 80% to 120 AMI, generally the access to state funding goes way down. There's small pots here and there, but in general, it's really hard to find any type of funding at the state level to build housing to serve that income. And so what that results in is it really is up to the local jurisdictions to come up with strategies and also funding to serve people in that income. So in the town of Truckee, excuse me, what we see, what we're trying to do in that zone is encourage the development of accessory dwelling units. We work with landing locals to create long-term rentals, and then working to find new developers that want to work in that zone to create ownership product. And then when you get into the red zone, that's sort of upper middle income. And if Christina, if you could go back to the graph that shows the type of incomes, and if you can go backwards. So we talked about sort of in the red zone, that would be, it's not on here, but it would you would keep going out and show higher incomes. And we know there's people in that zone, whether it's a first-year doctor, you know, whether it's administrator in one of the public agencies, they would be in that red zone, and there's still a high need for housing in that zone. So if you can go back to the bridge. So this, we refer to this, those of us who work in housing on a regular basis, every time I bring a new program to the town council, I bring this forward and I talk about, if I'm presenting a new program, I say where it falls in this bridge. And I think that for the general public to understand that, you know, certain products exist, like our affordable housing, because of the access to state funding that requires a certain level of density. And so understanding the AMI, understanding the funding that comes with that AMI, and then the products that result in that helps you sort of understand how housing is happening in our communities. I think with that, I'm handing it over.
So next we will have Emily Setzer, Senior Management Analyst of Placer County, and she will be defining for us workforce housing.
Hi, so workforce housing is actually not an official term that I believe any of us have adopted, but as a general concept, it's intended to be housing that serves our local workforce. So pretty simple concept. We have actually, as Placer County, put some criteria towards it in some of our programs. And some of this was based off of programs that have been successful in other areas, like the Indeed program in Vail that's been talked about in our community. Vail, Colorado has been pretty successful with it. So we've modeled some of our criteria after what other places that have been successful are doing. So the general concept for us is that at least one occupant of the household works full-time at an employment site in the local area. So For Placer, we're using an average of 30 hours per week over the course of a year. Someone who works at a site within the local school district geographical boundary. So that does not include somebody who works from home, but their employer site is in the Bay Area or New York or Texas. Somebody could work from home up here if their employer site is also up here. Or they could also be a private business owner and they own their own business as well. TRPA, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, helps govern the Tahoe Basin with all of the jurisdictions within inside the basin. And TRPA is actually also looking at some definitions of workforce housing. And they are also using that 30-hour per week on average over the course of the year. But their definition would be working at an employment site within the Tahoe Basin and or the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District geographical boundary. Some examples of where we're starting to use this concept is Hopkins Village, which, if you haven't heard, is a 40-unit halfplex, which is like townhouses, complex being built in Martis Valley. It's right on that Truckee-Placer County border. And those are for sale, and we have an interest list going right now for people who are interested in purchasing the housing. They should be developed and constructed by this time next year. And those are being sold only to people who meet this definition of workforce housing. They work locally within our school district boundary. Another program that we're using this concept for is called the Workforce Housing Preservation Program. And that is a program that is modeled after Vail's Indeed program to help local workers buy housing in the area. So while we may not have a definition of these in our code, I believe it is gaining traction, and Mountain Housing Council at their last council meeting has been discussing kind of how do we embrace this concept and kind of move beyond just an income limit. So some of the affordable housing Seana was talking about, it's only eligible for people making up to a certain income limit. So now we're also thinking of how do we designate some of our housing so that it's eligible, maybe with an income limit, maybe without an income limit, but only for our local workers. I think the next slide is mine too. So we can go on to that one. So that deed restriction you might hear about, but that ties in very closely to both income restrictions and local worker restrictions. So a deed restriction is a limitation on how you can use your property so that the occupants or home buyers meet either those certain income requirements or they can meet our local workforce definition or both. So like I was explaining, that Hopkins Village project, if you or anyone is interested, we do have it on our Placer County website, an interest list and applications to sign up if people are interested in purchasing. But that complex is being sold only to local workers right now. We did tie that with an income restriction of local workers whose household income is under 180% of the area median income. To figure that out and determine that, we're averaging the past couple of years tax information. And I think that'll be a really interesting and hopefully very successful project for our area to use kind of as a model, especially when local workers are having a really difficult time competing in the housing market right now. The other program that I mentioned was the Workforce Housing Preservation Program. That is modeled very closely after Vail's program. And so what that does is if a buyer puts an offer on a home, they get that offer accepted, they can apply to our program. And in exchange for us paying the buyer a certain amount that they can use then for things like the down payment or remodeling the home, they would then agree to deed restrict that home so that only local workers could live in it. And that deed restriction, it runs with the land. Our legal counsel has told us that they're comfortable with the deed restriction running for 55 years. Deed restrictions do vary a little state to state because each state has different laws. Our program in particular launches in July of this year, so we're ramping up for that. But that deed restriction on any program or project that we put out there will run with the land. So somebody could sell the home, but the deed restriction still applies. So you could have to sell it to a local worker, or you could rent it out, but the occupant would still have to satisfy that same criteria, like be a local worker. So a lot of our projects moving forward that have either county or town, or perhaps like JPA or some other organization funding it for local workforce housing, is probably going to come with a deed restriction, just so we know that we're not putting our funding in to help get a project or program going that is not funding our local workers, that may be funding somebody who's able to live here and work remotely and is actually employed somewhere else. Not that those people aren't great contributors or couldn't be great contributors to our community, but we definitely have a problem even housing our own local workers at this time right now. So we're just trying to really make the highest and best use of our funding that we do have available. That was my dog coughing. And I think I'll pass this on to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Emily. So our next term is Inclusionary Ordinance, and Anne-Marie Novotny of Placer County, the housing specialist there, will define that term for us. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you. In order that, as we're talking about, we have a real shortage of affordable housing throughout the county. And one of the things that Placer County's board did this past January is we had a new ordinance that went into effect, and it's our Affordable Housing Employee Housing Accommodation Ordinance, which includes an in lieu fee option. And this new ordinance went into effect January 1st of this year. And it requires all new residential development that's countywide that has more than 100 units has an inclusionary requirement that at least 10% of the units must be constructed as affordable, and that's on site. There's also for developments, new residential developments that have 8 up to 100 units, has an option to pay an affordable housing fee in lieu of the construction. And then all new non-residential development that's in the Sierra Nevada and Lake Tahoe area is now required to pay an employee accommodation fee prior to building permit issuance. So this is something that's brand new. We're seeing a lot of pre-development applications coming in, but we haven't actually had any that have actually been deemed complete to actually go forward with this, but we're getting a lot of applications in that do qualify. Next slide, please. And I think this goes on to someone else. So this, I think, is for Seana, I believe.
Seana, you are on mute.
The town of Truckee has for several years had something that we call Inclusionary Housing Ordinance, similar to what Anne-Marie mentioned. Many of the projects actually that you see around Truckee are a result of our Inclusionary Housing Ordinance. So it really is working. So our requirement is that 15% of the units must be deed restricted to low income. And remember, we talked about the AMI. So it's when we say they have to be restricted to low income, they're generally in the orange zone. So it's just good to remember when you say 15%, what is the AMI? So an example is Coldstream Commons. That is 48 units that are going to be income restricted for 60% of area median income and below. That came about because the master plan and the market rate developer on that site was required to either build 15% affordable on site or pay an in lieu fee, and they chose to move forward with building the units. So the 48 units at Coldstream Commons satisfy that project's inclusionary housing requirement. In fact, Truckee Artist Lofts, what's confusing about that is it looks like it's a standalone affordable housing project because nothing else is really there yet other than the infrastructure, when in fact it is the inclusionary housing requirement that is the requirement of that whole master plan community. So they just happen to start with meeting their inclusionary housing requirement first. And oftentimes for big projects to satisfy that inclusionary housing requirement, they bring in an affordable housing developer to create that unique product to satisfy their requirement. So one of the things that gets confusing is if a developer proposes on a case-by-case basis to do something that's an alternative to the inclusionary housing ordinance, they can propose something and then it's subject to review, and they can propose an alternative equivalent, meaning it has to have as much of a community benefit to the 15%. So Coburn Crossing is an example where they did do 6, so there's 138 units. They were required because they had a hotel on site to create workforce housing units because of a different ordinance we have where you have to create housing for all commercial. But they needed to provide 15% affordable, and they proposed that they would instead provide 132 occupancy restricted units. And it was, so instead of there being an income restriction, they said that we would make the remainder of the units restricted to local occupancy, similar to what Emily was mentioning about workforce housing requirements. So one person in the household has to work 30 hours a week for an employer based in the school district. And so Coburn Crossing is an example of an alternative equivalent to our inclusionary that uses that local occupancy designation rather than an AMI. And this is really the first time that the town has allowed this kind of alternative. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but the point is that we have policies in place that are in fact creating the housing that we are starting to see a lot in our community. So they really do work to drive housing.
Thank you, Seana. The next term that we are going to define is affordable housing, and Anne Marie is going to define that for us. Oops.
Oh, okay, we're going to this one. All right, so what does this mean when you hear the term affordable housing? And in general, the concept is when the cost, and that would be either your monthly mortgage or your rent and your utilities, is no more than 30% of the gross household income. The federal definition of affordable, they use the term referring to, and this goes back to the AMI that we talked about, households making up to 80% of the area median income. And then other methods of determining household affordability have been proposed, but the above definition is what is currently being used in the federal programs. So on this slide, we have, it looks like a very, very complex table, but it's really not that difficult. On the top portion of the table, the first table we have is what is the monthly amount available for housing, and that's by each of the AMI categories that we talked for. And we've got comparatives between both Placer County and Nevada County. And these are fresh, updated data for 2021. And so starting with the most extreme low income level on up to the highest income level is how the chart is organized. So just for an example, since we keep talking about up to 80% AMI, let's just kind of look at the bottom yellow column going across the rows. And so, for example, if you're looking at, say, a family of, or a 4-person household, the far right column, the monthly amount available for housing would be just under $1,800. And then if you go down to affordable home purchase prices, again, let's just take that same column, looking across on the lower yellow column. At the far end in Nevada County, a 4-person household affordable home purchase price is $272,000. And so we know that in Tahoe, and you all know it better than I do, is there are just not any homes available in that price range. So anyway, so that kind of gives you an idea of what's considered affordable. And you know, a lot of people are spending even more than the 30%, you know, because of the cost of the housing that we have at this time. I think let's go on to the next slide. So one of the things that the Placer County has been doing for years, and I oversee some of these programs, is we have various programs that we call the down payment assistance programs. And these are programs that help get first-time home buyers into the market by providing funding for either like their second mortgage or coming up with their down payments. And so it's income-based, so you have to, there's a lot of qualifications that have to go through. And some of the programs at Placer County, we do require, because they're first-time home buyers, that they go through an education program to qualify for their loans. But typically, the way these loan programs work is the principal and the interest payments are deferred until the home is sold. So they don't have to pay any of the principal and interest up front. A lot of the, typically our loans have been either a 3% compounded annually, so simple interest. Some of our loans, though, do have what's called shared appreciation instead of interest, and that's calculated at the time of sale. So we would take what they purchased their home price, then we take what did they get for the sale of their price, and there's that sort of that appreciation, and then there's typically a percentage that then the county would get a portion of that once they sold the home. There's a lot of different funding programs, primarily through the state and federal sources. Some of our loans are funded through what's called CalHome. We talked about the Community Development Block Grant Program. There's also Home Investment Partnership Program. There was a fund up in the Tahoe area called Martis Fund. That currently has, all the funds have been expended, so we would just have existing loans. We've had a lot of folks paying off loans with the low interest rates, but at some point in time, you know, hopefully there'll be more funding available for other programs that could serve within the Tahoe region. But we are trying to help people get into their homes, but again, you know, it's difficult when the home prices are just going kind of skyrocket right now. So I think that's it for this slide.
So that ends our presentation on our 7 key housing terms. Now we'd like to open it up to questions. So if anyone has a question, you can type it in the chat box, or you can use the feature. If you go, I think it's to the participant tab, you can raise your hand and we will call on you. Or you can just raise your hand like this. Jan, do you have a question?
Yes, Seana, when you were showing the regional housing needs slide, I remember from the 2016 report, or maybe subsequent to that, below that there was a full pie chart showing workforce housing needs per income level. Mm-hmm. And it showed a total need of 4,100, and then it broke out below 80% AMI that the need was 1722, mm-hmm. and above 80% it was God, can I still read it? 984, just between the 120% and 80%.
Mhm.
Anyway, it looks like 64% of the need under 120% is attributable to those earning less than 80% AMI. Do you know if that relative need has changed over the years, in the last few years?
Yep. So great question. Mountain Housing Council I'm actually literally texting with Stacy and Tara about when that new data will be released. So for everybody, Mountain Housing Council is updating our regional housing needs, and we're going to have that information, literally public information, that I would say in the next 2 weeks. And it'll be a little different this year because we know that we want to know more detail on specific needs in Truckee, specific needs in Eastern Placer County. And then we want it broken down by those higher AMI levels. So when the needs assessment that you're looking at, Jan, we didn't even know about this concept, this 195 and above. So the consultants really focus on traditional affordable housing assessment. And we've asked these consultants to really measure up and beyond that, because those people are showing up and we know that there's a need in those higher incomes. So within 2 weeks, you will never stop hearing about that data.
Okay, just one other question, still on that same general topic. Will you be able to break out need between individual households or families of 3 or 4 people?
Unrelated versus related households? Is that what you're asking?
Well, what I'm getting to is sort of like the need for 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom versus 3.
Yes.
That's where I'm going.
And I will say, just on my preliminary look at the data to answer your question, no surprise, our needs are greater, and they're still across the spectrum. There's not like a heavy weight towards the lower incomes. So
towards the lower household size versus.
There's not.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I remember looking at it and saying the needs have gone up and they're still distributed across pretty, I wouldn't say evenly, but it's not leaning towards the lower incomes in our area.
Or the smaller household size.
It is leaning towards a smaller household size. Yes. So 2.4 is the average household size in our region. So when you talk about sort of looking to the future and what kind of products do we need more 1 bedroom studios, 3 bedrooms, there's more of a need for 2 bedrooms and below.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. So I just want to let you know in the chat, Tara said that the needs analysis wraps up on May 31st. And then Dave, you had your hand up next. So please ask your question.
Yes, and for qualifying and your local workforce, is it possible for someone to have seasonal jobs summer and winter? I'm in a seasonal business, and I'm sure Squaw Valley and North Star have seasonal employees, but then have summer jobs also. Does that qualify for any of the programs?
I can answer that one. It does. Yeah, so the applicants don't have to have just one job throughout the year. We'll take into account multiple jobs or different jobs throughout the year and average that out.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Dave. Billy, your hand is up. You may ask your question.
Yes, in what ways can a business participate in these programs to encourage its employees to be involved in it, not just with promotion by saying, the education and allowing people that work for you to know that these programs are available to them, but rather to participate directly in it to perhaps encourage more participation for their employees? Can businesses participate financially to encourage participation or for their employees? I saw on that, let's see, everything's got a long name, but the Placer County, the Workforce Housing Preservation Program, for example, where there's an assistance in, I think it was in the down payment on purchasing a home, and then provided that you make it deed restricted and then make it available, for whatever the restriction is. Can a business participate in that and purchase the home, or does it have to be an individual? That would be a very specific question. But my question is also more general in how can businesses be active and proactive in getting their employees involved in these programs?
Yeah, I can speak for the Workforce Housing Preservation Program. That's a great question, Billy. So we have the program guidelines set up. And so we have an initial $500,000 that the county has to fund the program for the first year. We are actually looking for other partners to help fund the program. And that said, an individual business could come in and decide they want to fund their employees, but they could utilize our program, and they don't have to put the funds into a general pot that serves whoever comes along. We're happy to have the program out there to let other businesses or individual partners or stakeholders come along and utilize our guidelines and the actual program structure, but fund it for your employees. So I'm happy to talk with you offline sometime about that if you'd like.
Great, I would be interested in that. My concern is, it's nice if businesses are helping to send their employees, direct them towards these programs. An employee gets in it, they wind up either purchasing a home or renting or getting in, and then they move on and get another job. And then the business is sort of still stuck with, like, my employees don't have affordable housing. And so what I'm looking for is a solution that helps where businesses can sort of ensure that their employees have the housing by participating in some way. I'm sure you got to put some skin in the game to get that benefit, but just wondering if there are any broader concepts like that at play here.
I think beyond our Workforce Housing Preservation Program, nothing specific is coming to mind, but I think we would probably all be open to having discussions for future programs or projects, and how, if individual businesses are interested in like helping fund a project, like for example, Placer County is working on a achievable housing project in Dollar Hill, just north of town. And I think if individual businesses showed interest in funding a portion of that, setting aside 1 or 2 units or however many for in a business's employees, I'm assuming that Placer County would be interested in talking to you about that, and maybe the town too, or Nevada County. And I'll also put out there that there is the Truckee Workforce Housing Agency, another long name for you, but basically we call it the JPA. And I think in the future, the JPA could be looking at expanding to other partners. I don't have a timeline for that. The town and Placer are looking to join right now, but down the line, I think they'd be interested in opening to other employers in the area as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and can I just chime in on that because I invited a lot of the employers that I've been talking to join this, and Dave can say this. It's at the end of the day, your business model, our business model at the town is reliant on being able to retain and attract quality staff or staff to meet our mission. All of us are the same. And so at some point, there's never going to be a program that the town does or the county does that's going to solve that. It's got to be an individual businesses now to survive. I think we all need to think about how we incorporate housing into our business model. And so I'm always, happy to talk about options, but at the end of the day, as Dave knows, it's literally like finding a house and buying it and then renting it to your employees or helping your employee get into a house. And I think there is a potential for some of the smaller businesses to collectively work together to lower the risk. But I do think that just the mindset of coming up with the solutions that meet the needs of that individual business is going to be the most effective.
Thank you, Seana. Dave, I think you had a question about this topic, but Patrick had his hand up for a while. So I'm going to go to Patrick and then we'll circle back to you, Dave.
I had a question. It's either Anne Marie or Emily. You brought up the new fees that were rolled out at the beginning of the year from Placer County for developers like my company that are to be paid. So I'm wondering if those apply to achievable housing projects, like a 24-unit project in Dollar Point.
Anne Marie can probably speak to it also, but I will say we have a list of exemptions in which projects don't need to pay the fee because they're already satisfying some level of development that we would like to see. So we can send you the flyer that goes over all of the exemptions and some more detail about that. And we'd be happy to talk with you too about it.
Okay, and then my second question is, does that fee apply to projects that are already approved, that already have in the approval workforce housing that were part of the approval, of a requirement of the approval?
The key date was January 1st. If the projects were already had their approvals prior to January 1st of this year, then it doesn't apply.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Patrick, for your question. Dave, we'll go to you.
Emily, you were talking about a way that employers can fund projects that go to their employees. What was the name of that program?
Well, what I was thinking about specifically was the Workforce Housing Preservation Program, which is that deed restriction program modeled after VAILS. And the funding would be used to pay a home buyer in exchange for deed restricting their house for local workers to live in it for 55 years. So we are happy to have other stakeholders and the partners help fund this program because we know our 500,000 isn't going to go that far. So I can talk with you, Dave, about that. I think beyond that, for future projects that are getting built, we're definitely open to partnering. I think the hardest part, and I think a big takeaway from explaining that AMI and that bridge of achievable housing is that we really don't have any funding from the state or feds for housing that is targeted to households that make over that 80% AMI. So getting, county funding or town funding or funding from, like, say, if TTCF raised funds or something, or an individual employer wants to come and fund some units, we're always happy to kind of talk through those options and see what that would look like.
So if I'm thinking about a particular project, rather than get into specifics in this forum, there's potentially a way through a preservation program to maybe deed restrict a project. So if I sell something to an employee, the potential is they might have help from the county, or maybe it's best that I show you my project and then you can fill me in what kind of program might work for that. Because if I did sell something to an employee, I would be selling it with the idea that it would be 55 years or whatever it is to make it for workforce, so they can't turn around in 2 years and sell it for an ungodly amount of money if I sell it to them for cheap. So is that
Yeah.
something I should come and talk to you directly about?
Yeah, I think you have my contact info. Feel free to call me or email
I
me.
do.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's talk about
I do.
that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any other questions?
I wanted to just circle back that, especially to Billy's comment, is that we are working with Mountain Housing Council to host a conversation with the sort of smaller to mid-size employers about how to start to work on this topic. So we're not just saying great idea, and we want to host a thoughtful conversation and start to think about how to help you all who aren't the major, the hospital or the school district, but how do we collectively create a response to that need using the tools we have? So just look for that in the future.
Thank you. So yeah, that invite will come from myself or from Tara Zurado, sorry, our director. Chris, I see your hand is up. Would you like to ask your question?
There we go. I think I figured it out. So I am a builder interested in doing affordable developments in town, and willing to work with basically anybody here that wants to do it. But what can we do with planning, planning and building in the towns to allow some more of the creative ideas? Not so much tiny homes, but if you have a need for 1 and 2 bedroom homes, is there a way to do micro developments? Is there a way to get stuff changed in the planning councils to where they'll allow some more creative thinking that may not fit within the existing zoning, the zoning rules?
I can see my council member looking at me, wondering how I'm going to answer that question. So I guess my answer, Chris, is yes, but not as fast as you probably would like it. So, and we would need more specifics to exactly what you're talking about. And we're open to the conversation. That we're going through a general plan update, but this is the time now to have those conversations. Jan, did you want to add anything to that? I know you're not a panelist, but.
No, but thank you for asking. Yeah. And good luck, Chris.
Thank you. One thing that, as a developer, we're looking at these projects, and you're going to get a bunch of 3-4 story boxes. That's the most profitable way and the most expedient way to build housing, but that's not the character of our town. And so allowing for some alternative ideas, little single family residences that may not actually fit the typical development code is something worth pursuing.
And Chris,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you're talking specifically about the town, but if you're interested in on the developing or building on the Placer County side, we have gone through a Tahoe Basin Area Plan amendment that recently just got adopted. We've done we're working currently on bringing to the finish line some countywide zoning text amendments, and both of those are really targeted at trying to expand the type of housing that can be built. And if there's something else that developers are trying to build that doesn't align with our code, we definitely want to have those conversations with any builders out there and see what we can do to allow different types of development.
My personal view is that the town council in Truckee right now is open to anyone who's going to come up with a better mousetrap for housing.
Yeah, and I guess just again, you guys know the bridge now, and so what, and I know Chris, so what he's talking about is how do we create for sale product in that teal to red zone? And how do we make sure that the land use planning allows for it when we need the local money? Because you're not going to get any state money to build small single family residents in the moderate to above moderate income. So you need money, and then you need the land use planning to align with that need and that funding. So there's definitely awareness, and yeah. So
I don't know if you're thinking about multiplexes, but just as at the state level, locally, that idea is being broached for single family zoned areas, and that'll be somewhat of a contentious issue, but I think it will be on the table.
yeah, I think you're talking about SB 9, right? So Chris, I think if we could talk about real specifics, that would be helpful. Because there's
Yeah,
definitely
I'm
interest
working.
in that. Yeah.
Right. And Jan, I've met Sean. I haven't met you yet, but I'm polar opposite to that. I want, good design to come back into it, like keep the character. I don't want big multiplexes. I'd rather do smaller homes that people can, call their own backyard, front yard, house, garage. So that's my intent, and I'll fill it in with the people I'm working with at town. And obviously I'm interested in working with both counties and businesses as well, if it can fill a need.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Chris. And with that, we're going to conclude this first Lunch and Learn series. They are an hour long. I know everyone has busy schedules and is probably hopping off to the next Zoom meeting. So I want to thank our presenters, Emily, Anne-Marie, and Seana. If you need more information from anyone who presented or from the Mountain Housing Council, feel free to put your email in the chat and I will make sure to reach out to you. We do have some upcoming Lunch and Learn series sessions, one on June 15th about Pacific Crest Commons, Richmond Hollow, and Dollar Creek Crossing. We'll have Shell Rodriguez of the Pacific Companies presenting on those 3 projects. And then on June 29th, we'll have guest speakers Ozzie Yousefi and Luke Watkins talking about Meadowview Place, Coldstream Commons, and Truckee Artist Lofts. So watch Mountain Housing Council's website and Facebook page for more information on those 2 series. And thank you so much for joining us today. And was somebody trying to speak? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting.